Sports Minutes with Raushan.
Money FM 89.3. It's time for Sports Minutes with me, Raushan. From stepping in as acting president after the sudden passing of Lim Kia Tong to being officially elected in 2023, Bernard Tan's tenure at the Football Association of Singapore has been marked by bold moves and bolder statements, heavy lifting and heavier criticism, ambitious groundwork, and perhaps ambitions that never took flight. And now, having filled the hottest seat of them all when it comes to Singapore football, he has decided not to seek re-election. So why did it come to this? Was Bernard Tan the right man at the wrong time? Or was he the wrong man regardless of the time? And now that he's decided to walk away from it all, what legacy does he leave behind? This is not a soft farewell. This is hard talk. This is Sports Minutes with Bernard Tan. Bernard, a huge welcome to the show. How are you?
I don't know how to react to that introduction, but I'm okay.
It's about to get hotter, so I'm grateful for your time and there's plenty to talk about. Let's start at the very top. You've declared that you will not be running for a second term, not even staying on the council. When did you make this decision, and was this always the plan, or did something prompt the decision?
Well, it was always a possibility that I would not run. I've said in past statements that if there's a person that could come along and I felt that they had the opportunity to actually do the job better than me, I was not married to the job. And that was a sincere response. Obviously, if that didn't happen, then obviously I would feel a weight of responsibility to continue in it. But given that now it's a very hotly contested seat and there are many able people that are able to step up, I thought this is the right time.
It certainly is a hotly contested seat. This is not a conversation to talk about the candidates in the running. This is a conversation to talk about you and your time as president. You cited wanting to spend time with family, right, for stepping away. Is this a case of burnout or disillusionment?
No, Raushan. It wasn't because I want to spend time with the family and this has happened. It's more the fact that if I do step away, I will have a lot more time to spend with the family, and that's completely true. When you're actually in the seat of president of the FAS, you do spend a considerable amount of time thinking of the sport. At least I do. I feel the weight of responsibility. I am, after all, a football fan. I am, after all, desirous of Singapore actually doing much better than our present standing. And obviously, you think every day, about how you can actually make that happen. Obviously, once you take a step back, you start to realize that weight lifts off you. Obviously, the perspective becomes different and the priorities become different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just dive a little deeper into that decision you make. Perhaps you can share, when did you decide, I'm not going to contest? Was it after the new candidates emerged, or had you already decided?
Well, I certainly had to wait for candidates to make to throw the hat in the ring. And once that happened, obviously the decision became clearer.
Okay, and speaking to the Straits Times, you said football has been a part of me for some time, so letting go is not easy at all, right?
Yes, yeah.
What will you miss the most from your time as FAS president then?
I've changed jobs several times in my career. You obviously miss the people. I think that's the key. And, for what it's worth, football is filled with tremendous people that have enthusiasm for the game. You may not agree completely with all the views that's espoused, but certainly the people are passionate. I enjoy the company of the people who work with the FAS, both past and present. I also enjoy the camaraderie that exists through, the people who have been involved in football in the long past. A lot of people have given me tremendous advice, and that's something I will miss.
You mentioned the words advice and passion. Later in this conversation, we'll dive a little deeper into that. You talked about what you're going to miss. It's only fair I ask you, what will you not miss from this role?
I think the tremendous amount of scrutiny, tremendous amount of pressure put on the shoulders. I know it probably comes with the job, but that's certainly, I think, something I can take a leave from.
And we will be talking about the scrutiny in a short while. Let's stick to that. Were you aware that when you took on the role as FAS president, you were signing up for this level of scrutiny?
Raushan, I've been involved in the FAS not as president for over 10 years before I stepped up to become president. Nothing prepares you for that. It is a quite curious thing because if you think about life when you're not in the public eye, it's semi-private. You actually do have space. your social media is not filled with random comments that people make, you're also not mentioned anywhere, in the rest of the social media. But once you step up to a position, I think that happens. And as I don't know whether you feel it, Raushan, right? But the social media area can be actually quite a rough place.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. It is a toxic place. I guess this depends on which side of the line you're on. We'll talk about social media comments in a while, but I want to zoom in on one comment you made when speaking to Straits Times' David Lee, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone thinks they're a football genius. Mm-hmm. I share the sentiment. You clearly share the sentiment. But tell me more.
Well, in football, all of us have, I will call it, right, an opinion and a silver bullet, right? If something goes wrong, you have an opinion, you share that opinion freely, and then you have a silver bullet. There's one thing you should do to fix it. And I get this all the time. But you and I know, right, in life, rarely do you have that silver bullet. And if the silver bullet was in existence, someone would have shot it much earlier. Simple problems require simple solution, but complex problems require complex solutions. And in football, it's generally a complex problem. It is not one thing that you can do. The easiest thing to do is sack the coach, sack the president, sack the player, and then hope that something comes in its place. But hope is really not a strategy, right, Raushan? It really requires some thinking about how you get out of a place. I mean, just give an example to all. I send all commiserations to the supporters of Manchester United. But if it was so simple, that problem over 1 decade would have been solved. They are in a worse place than they have ever found themselves in. How do you solve this problem?
Absolutely. You talk about silver bullets. You fired a bullet right at a Manchester United fan. I'm hurting slightly, but I take your analogy completely, right? You talk about things are easy to do. It's easy to sack the coach. It's easy to do different things. I tell you what is very easy, going behind a keyboard and typing out comments,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And that brings me to your next quote from the Straits Times. Negative ones carry more traction than positive ones. You were obviously talking about social media posts or content that go out aimed at you. So all things considered, do you think you were unfairly judged?
Raushan, it's not just me. I've seen comments on players. I've seen comments on referees. I've seen comments on coaches. And they are very, very toxic. You're right. It's easy to remain anonymous and shoot, I will say very mean things, right? Sometimes to the point of being extremely personal that's meant to provoke a reaction. And sometimes it does. You don't see this just happening in Singapore. You see this happening around the world. For fans of the EPL, right? James Tarkowski had death threats after that tackle against McAllister. Is it deserved? The answer is no. I think in football, we promote this idea of respect. We promote this idea of, being fair in play. And at the same time, we endorse this behavior that really can't be it. It's one of the motivations I had in trying to promote in Singapore a culture of, much more a fair game, right? Fair play. We have now a respect committee, which is actually named for that reason, so that we are respectful in behavior on and off the field. Because I think football will actually get better if we do that. I take constructive criticism, but I think no player, no referee, no coach, no administrator deserve the abuse that exists today in football.
Bernard, I'm inclined to agree with the statement you just made. I want to ask you this, though. There are listeners listening in. Some of them may be contributing to the toxicity on social media, right? What's your message to them?
I think it's easy to be very rude behind the social media, be very personal. It's also very fun at some times, but you're making fun and you're taking it out on somebody who's actually trying to make a difference. I'd far more respect, that comment if that person is actually involved. But if you're a keyboard warrior and you're just doing that for the sake of just getting clicks or for the sake of just basically getting something off your chest at the expense of somebody else, I'd say think twice. I think for our children, we want to create an environment in which we are respectful towards one another and we can criticize, in a constructive way, but certainly not in an abusive way. And you don't want that in your house. You don't want that, happening to your friends. I think you should then, do what you think, you'd like to also receive in return.
You mentioned keyboard warriors, you mentioned critics. In a short while, I'll bring you a statement from TMSG. But first, I have to zoom in on you and ask you this.
Yes.
You were caught out once by a comment on social media, and like you mentioned earlier, you're only human, but you reacted. I'm of course talking about that incident where you replied in a comment saying, abuse me face to face. You did later apologize, but I have to ask, what triggered that moment?
You know, Raushan, I probably was very naive that I could hold a conversation over social media. That's impossible. I should have just walked away from that moment. But the truth, it's actually, I didn't even mean it in an abusive way, I meant it that, if you really want to have a chat with me and you want to yell at me face to face, because I think it's a lot harder. It's easy for you to just, say what you need to say. But if you really want to give feedback, and you're constructive about it, do it face to face. But, I regret that. My advice to anybody, in the public sphere, I don't think you can conduct a rational discussion on social media.
And I think that applies way beyond football as well, right? Just take a step back almost. What were your biggest learning points from that fallout, Bernard?
You mean on the social media? Just don't do it.
Short and simple, right?
Yeah, just don't do it. Yeah, just don't do it. Just walk away. Raushan, I'll be honest with you. If you ask me for players, coaches, administrators, referees, my first advice is don't even read the comments on social media. It's for your own mental health. Nothing good really comes from it. I think the same advice is now given to professional football players all around the world. All around the world, right? So their Instagram accounts and the social media accounts are run by administrators. The advice is don't read it. Yeah.
I take your point, but is that almost then locking yourself in the room, shutting out the noise if you're not accepting, I would say, feedback from people?
Well, Raushan, the thing is, feedback comes from football all the time, right? You get feedback from your performance on the field. You don't need someone to tell you you're playing, right? Like your team. You don't need that feedback. You know you're playing. You don't need social media feedback to understand the kind of criticism, because it will be reflected in the press, in the mainstream press. So you do get feedback. It's not as if by not reading social media, you're completely insulated from the world. I would argue that actually you get tremendous amount of feedback almost instantaneously for any performance you have.
On the topic of feedback, that's exactly where we're going to move on. Before we move on to the highs and lows of your tenure, in preparation for this interview, I reached out to select few members of the football fraternity, some of whom will be familiar to you, to summarize your time as president in one line. I'm going to read them out one by one on their behalf and would love to hear your response. Let's start with the first contributor. It's Eddie Hirono. He's a fan, observer, and host and producer of the Kicking and Screaming podcast. His statement reads, Singapore football has so many ills, it cannot realistically be solved by one man. But as the face of the organisation, unfortunately, he copped the most flack. Would you agree?
Probably. Yeah, probably. You want to solve any problem in football, it needs years. I just, came from an outing with Sydney FC, and we talked a little bit about, how Australia had the ambition, obviously, for the men's team to actually progress beyond the round of 16, which they have been in many years, but can't seem to break that glass ceiling. Again, they're talking about a process that will take a decade. So most football problems will take that long. Unfortunately, obviously, the patience of the average man is very short. We'll see.
Yeah, patience is not a currency that comes in handy in football as well as in life, right? Moving on to the next statement. This is someone you're quite familiar with. Deepan Raj Ganesan, Straits Times sports reporter. I dare say a friend at times, but mostly a foe perhaps. This is his statement. The FAS presidency is often seen as a poisoned chalice, yet people forget it's an unpaid role demanding significant time from someone who likely already has a full-time job. Given football today needs full-time attention, steering it in the right direction can't fall on the president alone. That said, one has to wonder, could Bernard have pushed his exco to do more?
Well, it wasn't really a choice that I had. Obviously, I fell into the role. I was very prepared to see through the term with Kia Tong at the helm, but I was thrown into this role. And obviously, I tried to do the best I could. I think it requires a team. It definitely requires a team. But obviously the president is the face. In private conversations, I will tell you how different it is when you are not the point man and when you're the point man. It's a tremendous amount of difference. But I actually am very grateful for the support that was given by both the council and the exco and the management in the time that I've spent there.
It'd be amiss of me not to re-ask this question which Deepan posed towards the end. Could Bernard have pushed his exco more? In your opinion, could you have done more?
I said this in the Straits Times interview. The key thing I've always reflected is, could I have done more? And the answer is probably yes. But he also mentioned the same thing. I have a full-time job. There's only so much hours in the day. I've also wondered, whether the FAS presidency should be a full-time job. I think at this moment the answer is probably no. But if a good management, a stronger management comes in, correct people come in, I think, maybe that can still work. But more of the execution actually needs to fall into the people who do this 24/7 full-time. And choosing the right people in football is critical. I mean, just an important aspect. Choosing the right coach, right, makes maybe 70-80% of the difference. Obviously, good players make a difference. 70% is really on a good coach. And so getting the right people, I think, is key.
Moving on to the final contribution, and this is perhaps arguably your most vocal critic. I'm talking about TMSG. Listeners will be aware of that page. We're going to keep the person, the admin, anonymous for the sake of this.
Everyone knows who he is.
I guess they do, but if you know, this is what the TMSG admin had to say. Bernard Tan had more than 10 years in the FAS, first as Vice President, then becoming the President, and in more than a decade since being involved, has nothing to show as his personal contributions to Singapore football. Apart from taking the sport to even deeper depths of despair. Your comments?
Totally disagree. I actually don't understand why people bother about TMSG. It is basically there's a clickbait. And if I asked whether any of them had actually contributed to step forward in football, I really can't say. Right? So, to be honest with you, I mean, the Malays in Singapore football has to do with two separate functions. One, what we have done and what our neighbours have done. If you ask me, right, people always say, let's go back to the time of Dola Kasim, Samad Alipiche, great players, fantastic atmosphere they created in all the Malaysia Cup campaigns. But to be honest with you, if I put the current national team and played against them, they will wipe them off the floor. The game has progressed tremendously. Everybody I've mentioned, I've talked to you, will tell you first the game has become more technical. So it's not just kick and run, right? It's much more technical. The formations are much tighter. I don't know whether Kim Song would still have the same space that he would have if he played today's game. It's faster, right? So the number of passes, it is also, the running is also tremendously much higher. I always remember a statistic in the Malaysia Cup games, an average player probably ran 8.5 to 9 kilometers. Today, you can't even be in a national team if you don't run 10.5. Right? So the game has tremendously changed. And what has happened, obviously, is we don't want to go back. We need to go forward. But what has also happened is many other countries have gone forward and some. So we have we have dropped relative to our neighbours. And if you think about it, it's just that they've woken up. Before 2000, Thailand didn't even have a professional league. And today, their professional league is probably the envy of Southeast Asia. Vietnam wasn't even considering. They set up a PVF academy, a 3-star academy to produce the players that won the AFF Cups and obviously the SEA Games as well. Right? Indonesia now, it's again, tremendous amount of investments going into in football, and on let alone Malaysia, right, which also has a tremendous amount of input. So it's not just what we do; it's what other people do. So by watching this relative motion, this is important. I'd like to say that football requires resources, right? And with resources, you can do a lot more, and that's what I think it will make a tremendous amount of difference. If you don't have the resources, it's very tough.
I think listeners of this show and observers of the game will absolutely agree with everything you said. Just as a follow-up to that, because you are set to leave your role as president, right? You talk about playing catch-up. I think I'm keenly aware that Singapore is indeed playing catch-up to our neighbours. How far is the gap, and are we in a good position to make strides? Because playing catch-up means you're already hamstrung.
Well, Raushan, the first thing to do is to have a proper structure. And maybe at this time I'll just ask indulgence for your listeners. What has happened over the last decade or so is really a hangover from Goal 2010. In Goal 2010, if you remember, and you can go back to see the National Day rally speeches that Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong said, it was really a strategy of having foreign players naturalized and playing for the national team. And it delivered us 4 AFF championships. The moment that stopped and other countries started to do that, our relative position changed, right? And that was the position that we found ourselves, over the long period of time. So the key change that was required is to get a program in which we do a little bit both. We have some naturalization, but more or less devote ourselves to developing our own players from young. Right? And no, football is again changed. It's no longer the fact, I remember talking to John Barnes from Liverpool. He was picked up by Watford at the age of 16. He was otherwise playing in the park. Today, that will never happen. If you're at 16 and you're not in a top team and playing top competitions, you're never going to make it. So you've got to start that process. Some people will argue from the age of 8, some people 10, some people 12. But you've got to be playing at a high level, right, week in, week out, in order to stretch the player to actually reach that proficiency. It's not surprising swimmers do that, pianists do that, So the fact that you actually need to start young is something that we've not really paid attention to. If you ask me, one of the prime achievements, right, dismissing what TMSG has said, is the fact that we managed to get a Unleash the Raw program going, right? It was lobbied, it was pushed for, it was helped. And finally, with Minister Edwin Tong's help, it actually came into being at some personal cost, I would say, because obviously chasing a football dream, even before you start, half the population will dismiss it. No, it's impossible, We're being criticized for the fact that 2034 World Cup dream is a crazy dream. I just spoke to my Hong Kong counterpart. He has a 2030 dream of Hong Kong making it to the World Cup, But countries dream, and that's what we need to do. And in order to get that program, we need to set ourselves some goals, right, in order to get ourselves moving. So you asked me, the biggest achievement that we've achieved is the basis for long-term success. We now have a youth development system that will allow our young players to actually emerge. For parents of 4G Singapore, this is great news because it means that I'm not expecting kids to do one or the other. You do both. You can play a sport at a high level and you can still do your academics. So now we've even got scholarships to help parents do that. We have schemes that allow you to defer entry into university, defer certain courses so that you can do university and play. We're going to come up with a huge sports hub in Kallang that will allow kids to actually be residents so that you don't even have to travel. I think these are huge times for 4G Singapore and people who have aspirations. If you're a 12-year-old kid today, I think you have a realistic chance of actually playing football at a very high level, hopefully making it to Europe.
No, Bernard, thank you so much for laying that out and explaining everything that is in the works for Singapore football to be resurrected, right? I want to move on to the highs and lows of your tenure. Clearly, the Unleash the Raw project is a tick in the box for you. I can see the pride in your eyes when you speak about it. But when you look back on your time, not just as president, but perhaps as part of the FAS, what else are some achievements you will take with you as you retire into the sunset?
Well, I did mention. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to the sunset, but but I do. I think that's the first. The youth development system is definitely the first portion, but I think also we've stabilized the national teams. I know people again have opinions of where we stand in the national team, but look, let me be very frank, right? No one expected us to make the semi-finals of AFF, especially the fact that many of our players playing overseas were not in that team. To actually outperform, and actually make the semi-finals is a great start. It's a great start. Credit to Ogura, credit to all the players, credit to the people who worked on it. But I'd like to think that was a journey that was not by accident and very deliberate. So maybe again, indulgence, I'll explain some of the things that actually happened that perhaps, people don't even see. We made it very clear to the national coach that the FIFA rankings were not what we're after. It was the performance in tournaments. And of the tournaments, we made it very clear again, it's AFF, AFC, and the SEA Games. And so because AFF was the tournament we're gearing towards, we were quite prepared to understand what was the best preparation for the team there. So one of the things that we took a lot of flack from, especially from the website you mentioned, is the fact that we went to Japan for a training camp. Right? The Japanese training camp allowed the coach to replicate the tournament schedule. A game, a rest day, preparation, game, rest day, preparation against very, very good opponents. It also allowed the coach to play all 26 players that he brought on the tour. One of the key things, Raushan, that if you looked at the final game, the AFF squad had 26 players. On the last day, all 26 were fit to play because they had acclimatized themselves to that tempo. The coach was very intelligent in making sure that players understood that they can go into the team at any time and expected to perform. Not just the first 11, but all the players. So that is a squad game, right? And all 26 players were fit to play. I'm very happy to say that, at the end of the day, 22 actually had game time, right? 2 goalkeepers obviously didn't, and 2 outfield players didn't. But that's a tremendous use of the squad. And I believe that it helped us to actually make it to the latter stages. So tremendous amount of credit, to the national coach. For the women's team, we also struggled with the same thing. We had an aging squad, a senior squad, and Karim had to come in, take the real daring decision to make the team much younger. A lot of the players who actually played in the Laos campaign to qualify for the AFF finals actually were unleashed the raw candidates. So as young as 16, 17, 18, they made the national squad. I think this lays a tremendous foundation for the future. There's still some things to do in the men's squad. Our men's squad is still much older than the average AFF team. And if you see Ogura, every window, he will bring in a younger player. So he is quite brave in terms of refreshing the squad. It'd be easy for him to play tried and tested players, but he knows if we're going to build a team for the next 10 years, he needs to make the squad younger.
Bernard, thank you for that context. The proof is clearly in the pudding because you've showed us what's happened in terms of the women's game as well as the men's game. You talk about the men's game and that AFF performance to reach the semi-final, right? And you say world rankings are not what I care about, or what we care about rather. Yet, since then, since the high of the semi-final, we've lost to Nepal. We've drawn against Hong Kong in the first match against Road to Riyadh. So as a common fan, as a listener of this show, they're going to say, okay, AFF was just a blip. There's a systemic problem with Singapore football because we can't get past Nepal and Hong Kong. What do you say to that?
So, first of all, Ogura should actually be representing the national team. I've always made it a point that as the president of the FA, we should not touch on performance issues. But now that I'm stepping down, I'm a football fan as well. So let me just ask the average football fan to give Ogura some space. Right? In friendlies, there are 2 ways that you can approach it. One is a very serious game because you're going after FIFA points. But because I relieved that of him, he uses friendly games to always trial players and experiment with his ideas. Anybody who saw the Nepal lineup would understand that's the case. In fact, when we were at the lounge and many people asked me how we were going to do tonight, I said, it depends. And it really depends on who he plays. And his tradition has always been to ensure that bench players do not feel like bench players, that they feel that they can step into the first team at any time. And that has always been his track record. Now, obviously, a different president could come and say FIFA points is very important, play all your best team all the time. But I've just relieved that of him, and I hope that's the way that we do it, because performance in the tournament is what is required. We had one bad game, right? Falling from the AFF, this was our next game, Hong Kong. It wasn't tremendously bad, we just didn't score. When I met the Hong Kong president, he said, you gave us chance. I said, you gave us chance as well, right? Right? We both have ambitions. We're both small nations trying to grow the game in very limited and constricted circumstances. But certainly, I think Ogura thinks long term, and I want the fans to really get behind the national team. And as a fan, I can see what he's trying to do.
Just a couple of things there to back what Bernard said. There were 6 changes to the team that lost in the Vietnam semi-final to the one that played against Nepal. So you're absolutely right. He was shuffling the pack. And coming back to the Hong Kong game, you talk about problems of not scoring. As a Manchester United fan, I know all about the problems about not scoring.
Yeah.
Bernard, we've touched on the highs.
Raushan, before you just go on, just to touch on that point, so, I always see some comments, and I know I'm supposed to ignore them, right? But sometimes people say that, Ogura doesn't know his best team because he keeps shuffling. But there's a purpose for doing that. And the purpose is exactly what I just said, is to ensure that the squad, every player in the squad, understands that if he's called on, he's a first-team player. He's not a bench player.
I absolutely love that. And the fact that you're stepping aside from presidency and speaking to me as a fan makes me wonder how many more episodes of Sports Minutes I'm going to have you on for to discuss the Lions. We've talked about the highs. Let's address the lows, Bernard. Would you consider the SEA Games 7-0 loss to Malaysia as the lowest point?
Absolutely, Raushan. And I'm a person who don't look back and regret, but take those as learning opportunities to move forward. And I'm actually quite happy that it happened at the beginning of my presidency. I think it was just 2 or 3 months after Kia Tong passed away. Kia Tong passed away in September. This was in November, December period. Because it made me realize that there are a lot of things that we need to get right in order for us to actually move that needle forward. If I had to do that SEA Games again, it'd be different. It'd be completely different. And this is the foundation that we've laid for SEA Games 2025. I'll just mention a few statistics just so that the listeners can understand. We came up from COVID. So there was very limited game time. Many other countries actually restarted their leagues much earlier, but we started it quite late. Moreover, when we went for the SEA Games, many of the players who didn't play for the previous 2 years had very limited external exposure. For the first time, if you go and play in an international game, the common comment from a young player is they're more physical and they're faster, right? So unless your body clock or your whole psyche is accommodated to that, you go there for the first time, it's like shock. You face shock. And unfortunately, that's perhaps one of the biggest explanation of why we kind of collapsed, especially towards the end. It was the last game of the campaign. And again, without a rotation, without a proper preparation, without understanding that you are playing a game every 3 days, right? It can get to you. So guess what? Straight away after we learn, we need to have every 3 games, right? We need to time the players. It's no accident that the SPL has scheduled every 3 games. We deliberately did that in order to make sure our international players are used to that kind of tempo. Obviously, some teams will take the opportunity to rotate their squad, which is also very good. You get more playing minutes to a wider bunch of players. But certainly, the intensity of preparing for tournament football needs to come up front. The importance of having international matches. This SEA Games squad, I'll be very surprised, will be if they play anything less than 10 against much superior opponents. So that when we go to the SEA Games, they're mentally cued on, prepared. I also have made it very clear that the players going for the SEA Games should be playing the SPL. And this is one of the reasons why the Young Lions exist, because if they're not getting game time in their clubs and they're a first team, we're going to loan them. We're going to put them in the SPL and make sure they get a game time. So these lessons are invaluable. We've set them up, and I think you'll see a much better performance in 2025.
No, it's heartening to know that lessons have been learned from, I dare say, that debacle almost, right? And hopefully we are better placed to go further in a SEA Games year as well. Bernard, thank you for the context. Just final few questions to wrap up, because honestly, we could sit here for the next 2 hours and talk about football. Looking ahead, you've said in your conversation with the Straits Times that the FAS elections, which is upcoming, should not distract us from the goal of football remaining united. By your own admission, unity has been hard to come by. Why do you think the footballing community in Singapore is as fractured as it is?
I don't think it's just Singapore. If you go to UEFA, they're fractured. If you go to, there are certain portions within confederations, they're fractured. I just think basically in football, people have very strong ideas. Sometimes those ideas are self-serving. Sometimes they're just different ideas. And like I said, before, everyone's a football genius. But in Singapore, I think that while healthy contest of ideas can exist, when we pull, you should be rowing together. And even if you don't agree, right, if it's 80%, right, give that idea a chance to grow, right? To attack it from the base and not even let it have a chance, I think it's a big problem. So one of the key things that I think, when we say the youth structure is to allow the Singapore Youth League to grow. It's a tremendous platform, 3,000 over kids play every week. If you had asked for me at the beginning of my time, right, that this would take place, I will tell you you're crazy. The fact that now we have 3,000 kids week in, week out across all ages, boys and girls, playing in Sport SG stadiums, the better stadiums moreover, and parents being involved, I think is a tremendous start. So give that idea time to grow. Give the idea the full support. And I think that's how I think the community needs to grow together. But I must mention one more thing, right? As president, you remember that you represent not just different opinions, but you represent different segments of that ecosystem. The professionals, the amateurs, the referees, the wannabes, the players, the kids, the parents. Getting them together is also quite a challenge. And that's something I think we also need to make sure that happens.
Bernard, you mentioned there it's a fine balance between putting yourself first, self-serving, and serving for the greater good, right? How do you think you fared on that?
Well, for me being president, was there glory? Generally, look, let me be very frank, right? And I say this with full respect to all my past presidents. None of them post-Malaysia Cup are glorified, right? They've probably come out from the office facing roughly the same criticism like, what have you done for Singapore football, Actually, if we had the chance to talk about it, can tell you, some of the things that have actually progressed and that people were very daring to try. So, that portion of the president having, glory, I don't think is something that we chase. I think what we want to do is obviously leave an imprint. I've mentioned to you what I think we've left, in this council, and that lays the foundation going forward. Self-serving would be things like I want my friend to be the national coach. I want my friend to be involved in paid jobs, which is one of the reasons why I think again the president maybe shouldn't be a paid appointment, so that doesn't happen. You are independent. You stand above it all. You don't take anything from the system, and you serve with sincerity. But if you take something from the system, then you become self-serving in defending that position, right? And that becomes a problem. I've also made it very clear that when we choose people, I know we get a lot of suggestions. The fans have a lot of suggestions, but we make sure that process is fairly independent, fairly robust, and is basically accountable by a group rather than a single person. But I'll be honest with you, actually at the end of the day, even if the group agrees, the president has to make a call.
Absolutely, and that's why they're the point man, they're the front-facing person who deals with all this flag. By your own admission, it's a poison chalice, this job, because you say no president has left feeling good, almost not facing.
No, I don't think it's feeling good. They don't have I would say, a glorified image, right?
Okay.
That, you done tremendously well. I think after, I can name all the presidents, that lead up to it, but I don't think none of them have actually, got that kudos. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm bringing this up, because we are looking for a new president. The elections are going to take place very, very soon. As the current president, the outgoing president, what's your one piece of advice to whoever takes the office? Well,
I think first of all, prepare for the public scrutiny. I think that's the first thing that I would say. Number two, be humble enough to absorb a lot of opinions, but be a unifying factor. I think that's also very, very important. And unifying factor means work with the stakeholders, and obviously, don't throw everything out. We've done some stuff. Build on it.
Bernard, final few questions to wrap up. Looking back on it all, do you think Bernard Tan, the football fan, got lost somewhat in Bernard Tan, the president?
No, I think the roles are very different. I don't think I approached the work as the president as a fan. At some stage, I'm even considering writing what I've learned down in order to just allow, deeper reflections. Like we've had this conversation before, or during this conversation where we've had a chance to talk a little bit more deeply on certain areas, because I think that will help the conversation lift the conversation to a higher level. I'll go back to being a fan, but I will never be the same because I will see football through the eyes of an administrator. And rather than criticize, I will empathize and I will try to understand. Decisions are sometimes, you have to make them. Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're very mysterious, but you have to also kind of to understand the background. See, one of the more mysterious, appointments I thought, recently in the Premier League is Leicester appointing Ruud van Nistelrooy, who had no, background. They could have gone for Sean Dyche, who could have probably helped them, have some grit to stay up. But they went for an untested coach. If it worked out, it'd be brilliant. Now it hasn't worked out, you may look back and say, so football's like that. You get criticized for the lows and you get praised for the highs. And unfortunately, during my time, the highs for Singapore football, I expect will be in the years ahead rather than the years past, right? And so again, I'm asking people to look for the years ahead.
Follow up to that, when you talk about the highs coming up in the years to come, right? You're going to be somewhere in the crowd, perhaps, as a fan. Will you look back with pride saying you planted that seed for that tree to grow?
Certainly. I'd like to be able to say that, that we did two things, right? We started UTR. I won't say it's totally the FAS effort, but certainly we lobbied for it, right? And we helped to construct it. So we managed to get it, as a base. This will lay the foundation of the future. Whether it will deliver success or not, very, very important, right? Others can do the same, and they can do it better. So we need to constantly be on our toes to ensure that the experience our boys have is actually at a very high level. So that's the first. I think very importantly, we've started this road of trying to get naturalized players again. That effort stopped a long time ago, right? We have other naturalized targets. Again, we're trying to get Perry across the line. No pressure to anybody, but it's just something that we sincerely felt was important for us. And then obviously, I think working on the Singapore Premier League is important. We're about to announce the new slate of teams coming in, and hopefully that will again reignite great interest in that league.
Change is certainly coming, and it's good to hear from the current president of the FAS on that front as well. My final question to you, Bernard, is if this is indeed goodbye, how do you want to be remembered?
It's perfectly fine for me to walk away into the sunset and be, like you say, and be quite anonymous about the whole thing. But certainly among the people that we work with, certainly the staff of FAS and the chairman that we work with, right, I'd like to remember that be somebody that actually had brought some positive change to Singapore football and had put a lot of effort to try to make that happen.
I think your effort has been laid out in the past 45 minutes of this conversation as well. Whether you agreed with his decisions or stood in fierce opposition, no one can say Bernard Tan took the job lightly. In a sport where passion often spills over into poison, he tried to stay the course, building structure, chasing progress, and absorbing blow after blow. As Singapore football turns the page, his chapter ends, but the book is far from finished. Bernard Tan, thank you for your service, your candor, and your time on Sports Minutes.
Thank you, and I'm happy to, be a member of the Singapore football community and to continue to help in any way I can.
And you'll always have a seat on Sports Minutes. Bernard, thank you.
Thank you so much, Raushan. Thank you.
Sports Minutes on Money FM 89.3.